What if the most dangerous moment in a crisis is not the attack itself, but the silence that follows? In this high-stakes standoff, the Strait of Hormuz, one of the world's most vital oil arteries, becomes more than a waterway. It becomes leverage, pressure, and a warning to the entire world. Retired General Jack Keane says America now holds Iran's economic lifeline in its hands, but he also delivers a darker message. This is not the time for celebration. Because when a regime has spent decades surviving through delay, deception, and brinkmanship, the real threat may begin the moment everyone thinks the storm has passed.
All right. We welcome back to the show General Jack Keane, Fox News senior strategic analyst. General Keane, as always, sir, thank you for helping us. A lot of information and news today, and let me begin by asking your assessment, sir.
Well, we're in a very good place. The president clearly has doubled down on the Iranians, for sure. I mean, they started with closing the Straits of Hormuz, and they got a ceasefire out of that. They were probably likely feeling pretty good about that. And look what happened here. We put a blockade in place. This is President Trump's decision. And everything changed as a result of it. And the reason simply is that we are now holding in our hands Iran's complete economic viability as a nation, because they are 100% dependent as a nation on the oil that we are now blocking falling into their hands in terms of the distribution of the oil and the money that would follow as a result of it. So we are on a very good path here. But I also, because of that 47-year history of dealing with the Iranians, and I dealt with Iran as an adversary nation most of my military career and then some after it. And I have a healthy dose of skepticism in dealing with these guys, Larry. In other words, what we have to take into consideration here is what Iran is promising to our negotiators and what they actually do in terms of signing a statement and then actually execute. That could be something different again. So what my skepticism surrounds, what do they want to do? They want to extend this ceasefire as long as they can get it, because this is complicated and we have to work the details and drag this out. That is what they have done in the past. We got to stay focused on them. We got to push them. What we should be doing is push them to finish by the deadline and get the agreement done on everything by the deadline, and then work out some details after that, and do that as quickly as possible. And make certain then, when everything that they say they're going to do, there has got to be a separate process for verification of just that. And that means permission to go into Iran anywhere, anytime, inspections, anywhere, anytime. That has never been the case in their 47-year history, to include the IAEA.
Yep.
They told them where they could go and where they could not go. And we have to break that paradigm. All of the process of the past and how they controlled inspectors and how they deceived and lied through all of this is what we're dealing with. This regime has not changed. Remember what's happened here, Larry, and you know it because we talked about it. We've changed the faces and the names. We have not changed the ideology and the regime itself. They are still there, and they are working on their own self-interest and how best do they recover. As an example, we know from a fact, from intelligence sources, that they are fastly trying to recover their ballistic missile program. Much of it is under rubble, as well as their launchers. We know they've got about 1,000 missiles that they haven't used yet, and somewhere in the neighborhood of 100 launchers, and they're recovering all the rest of that. Now, why are they going to all of that trouble? Likely because down the road, they're not going to change one iota. And we got to maintain that skepticism. I'm taking anything away from the deal. I'm just trying to sprinkle a little realism on who we're dealing with here. And we got the history and we have the evidence of what I'm talking about here. So we got to be really careful of what we're doing here with them, knowing who we're dealing with. And I understand the negotiators have a tendency to get euphoric over it. Iranians are telling us they're going to do X, Y, and Z. I got it. Those are words only. Iranians sign a piece of paper saying they're going to X, Y, Z. I got it. That's a piece of paper only. None of that is execution until we find ourselves flying in there to take out the highly enriched uranium. Now that is real substance, right? Plus all the other things that we have to verify as well.
Well, I think, first of all, I agree. I mean, it's trust but verify to the 100th power. Absolutely, 100%. You're right. Of course, you're right. I think it's very important in this, what Mr. Trump said, the naval blockade will remain in full force and effect as it pertains to Iran only until such time as our transaction with Iran is 100% complete. And I presume, I mean, not only is it important that we maintain control, so we cut off their money, their finances, their economy, okay, and bleed them out, but also until the process you described is worked through. It's very tricky. There's going to be a trend, they say, it will be a transfer of the enriched uranium from Iranian hands to American hands. As you noted, sir, that has never happened before. They don't even let the international inspectors in, which said that. So we have to work out a very careful process here and then see if, in fact, it works, if they permit it to happen before we let up on anything, right? Our combat troops have to remain in place and the embargo has to remain in place until such time as that whole operation is completed.
Yeah, and the other thing we have to remind ourselves of, we have to keep in place the return to combat operation. Now, no one wants to hear that. I get it, because now we're approaching the end and everybody's feeling good about it. But that is real muscle. And that helped to bring us to where we are. And we got to hold that over our head. Obviously, our combat forces in the region aren't going anywhere. Israel's forces aren't going anywhere. And we can't, in our exuberance towards the end, to get this deal finalized and made public and feel good about it, we got to make sure the discipline is in there and the diligence is in there to really force them to deliver on what they say they're going to deliver, or deliver on what they sign and write what they're going to deliver. Because in the past, these are different things completely. And I think we've got their attention. I'm not disputing we don't. And we certainly own them in a way we never have before. And there's one reason why this is all happening, because our backstop here was President Donald Trump. He insisted on it. When they thought they doubled down and got the war stopped, and they had this leverage and momentum, we were feeling pretty good about all of that, then he took matters into his own hands and ordered the blockade. Not only that, but remember, he ordered also to clear the straits, which we're still doing, secure the straits, and escort ships through. That would have been phase 2, and it likely is not going to be necessary now, but preparations are underway if it does become necessary. What we're hearing from the Iranians is good news, that they are opening the straits in terms of no more intimidation and coercion of the ships. And let's hope that really turns out to be the case. And therefore, we don't have to do that second operation. That is very good news.
But we can't be sure of that either. I mean, I was reading there, the notices. They were linking this opening of the Strait of Hormuz to the Lebanese ceasefire with Israel. I mean, there just seems to be always a lot of conditions. They're not straight shooters. So your point is important. We have to maintain control. And I think President Trump knows that. We have to maintain control. We have to have the combat troops ready. We have to maintain control of the Persian Gulf and the Strait of Hormuz and the Gulf of Oman and all that. Stop the money, stop the oil, and keep the heat on. There's no rush to make this transaction. I mean, it's got to be done very carefully. I worry some people might think, oh, yes, by this weekend it'll all be done. No, that's not possible. This is a lengthy process.
Well, can I add something, Larry?
Yes.
Was not one of the topics. The president tweeted out today, no bombing of Hezbollah by Israel. And I think there's a fundamental misunderstanding here. In the terms of agreements for the ceasefire that all parties have agreed to, this is a ceasefire in Lebanon that Hezbollah and Israel and Lebanon have agreed to. In those terms, it permits Israel to conduct defensive air and ground operations if Hezbollah is indicating that they're planning an offensive attack, if one is imminent, or if one is actually being executed. Therefore, Israel has the right to defend itself using ground power and certainly using air power, because that gives them an advantage. And certainly that is what we have had for the last 6-7 weeks now, and certainly that is what Israel has. Just wanted to clear up that misunderstanding. I think what the president was reacting to was an offensive operation that took place many days ago in Beirut, when a couple of apartment buildings were hit and they were crushed because what? The Hezbollah made those operation centers and evicted the tenants. And they did it in Christian and Jewish neighborhoods. And there were some civilian casualties as a result of that in terms of collateral damage. Just wanted to clear that point up. And certainly the president now is aware of that misleading information.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. General Jack Keane, as always, thank you for your wisdom and your insight. We appreciate it enormously.
By the end of this conversation, the story stops being just about military positioning and starts becoming a study in strategic memory. General Jack Keane is not speaking as someone reacting to a single headline. He is speaking as someone who sees this moment through the long shadow of nearly half a century of confrontation with Iran. And that changes the tone of everything. Because while many viewers may hear words like ceasefire, negotiations, reopening, and progress, Keane hears something else beneath them: time being bought, pressure being tested, and another opportunity for a familiar regime to survive by saying one thing while preparing another. That is what gives this moment its documentary force. It is not simply a report on where events stand today. It is a warning about how quickly optimism can become vulnerability when history is ignored. At the center of the story is the Strait of Hormuz, a narrow passage with global consequences. It is not just geography, it is power concentrated into a choke point. Keane argues that once the blockade was put in place, everything changed. Because America was no longer reacting to Iran's pressure, it was applying pressure of its own. In his telling, the balance shifted dramatically. Iran, he says, is completely dependent on oil revenue for economic survival, and once that flow is threatened, the regime's room to maneuver narrows fast. That is the strategic drama of the clip. Not missiles in flight, not explosions on screen, but the slow suffocation of leverage. And yet, Keane refuses to let that become a victory lap. That is what makes the tension more compelling. Because in his view, strength is only useful if it is paired with discipline. Otherwise, the very moment that feels like control can become the beginning of another miscalculation. What makes his analysis especially gripping is his skepticism toward promises. Again and again, he returns to the same core idea. Words are not action, signatures are not compliance, and agreements are not reality until they are verified in full. He stresses that negotiators may hear what they want to hear, papers may be signed, and statements may be issued, but none of that matters unless there is execution. Real access, real inspections, real transfer of enriched uranium, and real proof that the machinery of escalation has actually been dismantled. In narrative terms, this is where the story deepens. It becomes a conflict between appearance and substance. One side may want the optics of a breakthrough. The other side, at least in Keane's framing, must demand evidence before relief. That tension is powerful for viewers because it taps into a universal fear that leaders may declare problems solved before the danger is truly gone. And Keane's warning does not stop at diplomacy. He brings the audience back to the hard edge of reality by pointing out that Iran, according to intelligence he references, is already trying to recover parts of its ballistic missile capability. Rubble does not mean surrender. Damage does not mean transformation. Faces may change, he says, but ideology remains. That is one of the darkest and most important ideas in the video, because it suggests the real contest is not over facilities alone, or deadlines alone, or even one transaction alone. It is over whether a regime built on strategic patience can be forced into a level of transparency it has historically resisted. In that sense, the clip becomes less about one temporary arrangement and more about whether pressure can break an old pattern that has outlived administrations, headlines, and diplomatic resets. There is also a psychological layer running through the entire discussion. Keane sounds confident that the United States has Iran's attention in a way it never has before, but he is equally careful to warn against emotional overreach. That may be the most important lesson of all. In moments like this, public narratives often swing too fast, from panic to triumph, from danger to relief, from crisis to closure. But military reality rarely moves with the speed of political messaging. Keane insists that combat readiness must remain, that the embargo must remain, that operational pressure must remain, and that no one should imagine this can all be wrapped up neatly by the weekend. That insistence on patience gives your documentary commentary its ideal ending tone. Not fear, not celebration, but controlled suspense. The kind that keeps viewers leaning forward because they understand that what matters now is not the announcement of success. It is whether success can survive contact with reality. Then the story widens again, reaching beyond Iran alone. The mention of Hezbollah, Lebanon, Israel's defensive rights, and the risks of misunderstanding ceasefire terms reminds viewers that this is not an isolated chessboard. It is a connected regional system where one wrong assumption, one rushed interpretation, or one misleading signal can trigger consequences far beyond a single front that expands the emotional scale of the video. The Strait of Hormuz is about oil, yes, but it is also about the fragility of the global order built around trade routes, deterrence, alliances, and timing. And in that world, caution is not weakness. Caution is survival. So the real takeaway from this interview is not that the crisis is over. It is that power has shifted, pressure has intensified, and the next phase may be quieter, but no less dangerous. This is the kind of moment history often mislabels in real time. Not the climax, but the pause before the true test. Not the end of the story, but the moment when discipline matters more than force, and verification matters more than rhetoric. And that is why viewers should keep watching this story closely. Because if General Keane is right, the most important question is no longer whether Iran feels pressure. It is whether the world has learned enough from the past to stop confusing temporary restraint with permanent change. And until that answer is clear, the waters may be open. But the danger is still very much alive.